By August 2009, I had a dream where I met President Robert Mugabe. In that dream, I was like a 10-year-old boy following Mugabe like someone following his father to a farm. We arrived at a place which I perceived to be in northwestern part of Zimbabwe, where Mugabe showed me very big acres of land. In that dream, a land which looked like a farmland, and there were dried grasses and half-cut trees of maize that had dried after harvest. It was in afternoon time, according to the appearance of the dream. In that dream, Mugabe said to me, "Here is the land. I gave it into your hands. When you grow up, look after it. Use it for development and never allow it to get into the hands of white men." Then I said, "Okay, Papa." As we turned back to go home, I woke up from the sleep and marveled. I never let this dream to anyone down till this day. But prior to that time, my mind was always attached to Robert Mugabe. One day in 2002, before I left Nigeria, I had a little political discussion with my younger brother when he accused Mugabe of ruining Zimbabwe economy. I simply told him that it was not the case and that he was getting his information from the media, to which he agreed. Even in South Africa, I always have arguments with Zimbabweans who show disgust about Mugabe's regime, but has no reason to, because they don't understand the problems of the country. Between 2012 to the year 2014, I was so troubled that I began to question anything I see around me. I could question the preaching about God and Satan, as always conveyed by religions. The first reasoning that came to my mind was the laws of cause and effect, the laws of bipolarity evident in nature. I began to question about the existence of Satan. I was not satisfied by the answers I was getting. I was asking myself, how could God, in all his wisdom, create his enemy called Satan and empower him to be his opposition? No, for me, this couldn't be so. Some say Satan was once an angel who later rebelled against God and God sent him to earth and his followers to earth. Then I asked myself, why was it that God did not send him to earth when he was good to teach mankind the ways of godliness? Only when he became bad that he sent him to earth. Why didn't God finish him in heaven rather than bringing him to earth? If they were together in heaven and problems occurred among them, they should have finished their problem there rather than bringing him to the earth. Now, if that be the case, then for me, God was wrong, because he knew that Satan could be more powerful than ordinary mortals. For I did not see a reason why someone could bring a fire and place it near a curtain made of wool, knowing that once the fire catches the curtain will inevitably burn. And he turned around and tells the curtain that if you allow yourself to be burned by this fire, I will put you into hellfire. That doesn't make sense. Again, here is the popular saying that Egypt were devil worshippers and Israel are the children of God. Fine, but if Egyptians were devil worshippers, why would God send the Israelites, his children, to live and be educated by Satan in Egypt for hundreds of years? This, for me, doesn't make sense. I didn't derive any satisfaction from this. I question myself, how can a man send his children to a school in which devil is the teacher? This doesn't make sense. Even when Jesus Christ was born and enemies wanted to kill him, like King Herod, God again commanded that he be sent to Egypt for safety. Then how could God send his children to be secured by his enemy Satan in Egypt? It's senseless. Again, here is the issue of hellfire, which I'm not satisfied with. For how could God, with his wisdom, create his children only to throw them in fire, in scorching everlasting fire? How can a man have children, use his resources to feed them, only to throw them into a fire when they grow up? For me, this is unacceptable. All these were the questions that started my inner awakening to many realities. Some say that many esoteric societies worship Satan. But when I check, I find out that many great men of the world have studied esotericism and understood occult sciences. I wasn't just satisfied anymore with the world around me. I could speak alone without even noticing it. Sometimes my friend will ask me whether I'm running mad. What are you always thinking? Your head gonna blow one day. When he says so, I try to regain myself briefly and laugh that question off. I began to lose appetite of social life, and all what is going around me is just no longer satisfactory. I even began to overlook my businesses to search for greater knowledge. So different was the world around me to the world constantly introducing itself to me. I had many symbolical dreams, the image of which I have never understood till this day, except the face of my father, my late father, who was constantly fighting me for reasons I'm yet to understand, but which gradually calmed down. I could see my father in the dream, where his full body was buried in the ground. Only his head was out. Sometimes he would pursue me with a machete, threatening to kill me, and I would escape. One day, I saw my father in the dream, where he had a wood tied in triangular form on his neck, while other parts of his body was buried in the ground. He was struggling to come out of the ground, and when he did come out, he would pursue me, and then I would flee. Sometimes in the dream, I would see myself floating on the air. Sometimes I grew wings and fly around to such a point that people would shout at me like a magician. I used to fly above, even upstairs and higher even than many people could imagine. How do I get to the air to suspend myself and walking on the air? I did not know. At the time, I began to ponder on my relationship with my father to see if I had done him anything wrong in the past, because I couldn't find myself guilty of anything. Why was he attacking me in the dream? I could not understand. My father was so happy when I was managing his business that he came out one day to declare in front of his friends that I am the best and most sincere businessman he found among his male children, after trying all of them. Yet I did not understand why he was trying to kill me in dreams. Also in my dreams, I could see reptiles with lion head. I could see many bizarre images that are terrifying. This situation would go on for several months, until one day I began to remember what my father did to me in a bush in my village. He took me to a bush under a tree and near a river in the year 1981, in plain afternoon during the month of March. This I shall not explain here, but I later understand it to be an act of traditional initiation. After that, he told me not to take bath until the next day, which I observed. On the evening of that day, he came and took me to sleep with him in his own room, so that my mother would not bat me before we slept, and he warned me not to tell my mother or anyone what we did in the forest, of which I obeyed up till this day. Few days later, in the same month of March 1981, he related to me the mysteries surrounding my bed, which also was confirmed by my mother at later days. All those who say that Africa had no wisdom and philosophy are in serious ignorance of the fact that a people who could not commit their knowledge in writing are the most secretive of all human beings. For in my view, African preferred oral tradition. But let me stop here, because the scope of this story goes beyond this message. But as soon as I began to remember that initiation, my father began to appear rarely and gradually disappeared from my dream. But other terrifying experiences I was having in dreams continued. I could not sleep. I was always scared to go to bed. So terrifying was that period that I became alcoholic in order to help me to sleep. I could drink more than 6 bottles of beer in the evening to see if I could sleep deeply, yet it couldn't solve the problem. Not that I couldn't sleep at all. I could sleep and have an afternoon siesta, but the night experience was so terrifying and troublesome. At the time, it seemed to me that the beer is no longer strong enough to make me sleep. I switched to drinking hot stuffs. I could drink it with soft drinks, and yet it couldn't solve the problem. I began to drink hot drinks without mixing it with any soft drink, yet no ways. My life now makes little sense to me. Then I decided that I must die now. I took a rope from my hardware shop to my house in Brixton to hang myself. But when I arrived home, I fell asleep from 5 p.m. till the next morning of the next day. And the idea of suicide was again abandoned. But the problem of not sleeping persisted due to troubling dreams. All those occurrences in dreams I later understand to be a direct initiation into the mysteries of life, which helps one to understand things that modern mind cannot comprehend. It was a terrible experience in my life, so painful and confusing that I could not understand what I was seeing in the dreams. I was so troubled about my situation that I once again decided to commit suicide, until a spirit directed me to seek further knowledge with patience. My mind began to crave for something bigger than ordinary minds. Then I began to be interested in the deeper meanings of life, and through internet book search, I came across a book titled The Secret Teachings of All Ages, written by Manly P. Hall, a Canadian author. Reading it, I saw in the book where it was written that the great powers of divine providence initiates and reveals great knowledge to man through dreams, and I began to calm down. I also bought The Secret Destiny of America, written also by Manly P. Hall. I bought Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. In these books, I could see some phrases that consoled me, but I couldn't understand them at that time. Honestly speaking, I did not know what was directing me towards these books. And these are books so difficult to understand if you are not called into it. The way I can describe those experiences was a quote from the works of a French philosopher, a Jewish, Henry Bergson, when he says, "Fortunately, some are born with spiritual immune systems that sooner or later give rejection to the illusory worldview grafted upon them from birth through social conditioning. They begin sensing that something was amiss and start looking for answers. Inner knowledge and the anomalous outer experiences show them a side of reality others are oblivious to, and so begins the journey of awakening. Each step of the journey is made by following the heart instead of following the crowd, and by choosing knowledge over the veils of ignorance." Also, some other quotes from Henry Bergson say that some other faculty than the intellect is necessary for the apprehension of reality. This also consoled me. Another quote from an unknown source said, "When you are ready, the spirit world will show you things that others do not yet see." I was also consoled by these words and so many other quotes. But I was so troubled within this period that I nearly turned to a mad person. Then I decided that I must seek for Satan to know why he is the giver of a great knowledge, because I've seen that many people study esotericism, which people say is satanic. I joined an esoteric order, but I couldn't see Satan. I again joined another esoteric order in search of Satan, but I couldn't see him. All what I saw was an advanced version of God's wisdom, strength, and his sovereignty over the universe. The whole bad situation began to calm down in the year 2013, when I discovered those esoteric order and joined them. Up till now, I'm still looking for Satan, and I can't find him. Story in a man's life that does not include the painful part of women is not complete. For it is not possible that the spiritual and emotional growth of a man will be activated without the pain that comes from women. If you haven't seen that in your life, then you are probably still a virgin. Something happened to me on August 1997 through a woman, which is of no use disclosing here. That was my first real experience of what woman can do to awaken me into a different reality. So painful and disappointing was it that I had to stay away from women for 3 years and 8 months. But at the height of that moment, I witnessed in me a significant influx of spirituality. It did not end there. Other painful things from women followed at different times. I cannot say enough about the pain women can cause in the life of a man. I have to keep quiet. For they are the most painful, but also the greatest source of instruction that life has put for the benefit of man. Now that I have understood the role of woman in the life of a man, I have to shut up my mouth. It is the only role women are willing to play free of charge in the life of a man. And without knowing what they are doing, they do it because it satisfies their ego. It will always be a big mistake to place your whole attention on women. At the same time, the biggest mistake a man can make is to ignore them. If you want to enjoy women, do not try to get too deep into their innermost personality. In addition to this, don't claim to have a balanced knowledge of life if you don't understand women deeply. But there is a lot in women that men don't have. Indeed, what men have that women don't have may be easy to understand. But what women have that men don't have is not visible to ordinary eyes. Even when your eyes are open to see them, there are no words to explain them. And please do not make the mistake of thinking that women only bring pain and difficulty into the life of a man. But if that pain is what you require for your awakening, then you cannot avoid it. If you bring women too close to your heart, you will get lost. And if you keep them too far away from your heart, you will get lost even further. If you attach your heart too close to a woman, you will be led to a heartbreak. But if you don't love women, you probably represent a devil who has taken the duty to upset the balance of life. Woman is the biggest job that life has put to test the quality of a man's perseverance. They are a deep pit given to man to fill up. And whatever you put there in a bit to fill it is only visible at the moment you are putting it. Go and come back and see it empty again. This lack of persevering quality on the part of men, and the mere fact that women ignore that they are called to attain the highest level of serenity, is the root cause of emotional and physical violence perpetrated by both ignorant men and women. Unfortunately, violence cannot and will never solve the problem, and there will be no end to nature's call of perseverance on the part of men, and the attainment of serenity on the part of women. The knowledge about women cannot be given by man to his fellow man. Only women themselves will teach you whom they are in a manner that you will understand them faster. Furthermore, I can only say that you don't need to advise a man a lot about women. For every man will get what is appropriate for himself, and at the right time and in the right manner. For just as a great initiate understands the mysteries of life and loses the fear of death, so a well-cultured man learns from the pain that comes from a woman and allows himself to move forward. I know many people will be surprised when I talk about staying away from women for so long, but there are reasons to be learned from here. During one's early stages of spiritual awakening, all things that could cause him distractions will be deprived of him through the pain of that very thing, whether it is money, women, or any other thing else. This goes for as long as is necessary and to have sufficient awakening, when there will be of no distraction to you. And the magnitude of those painful deprivations depends on the level of your soul personality and what you require for that awakening. To explain more on this, there are different voltages in electric current. A 6-volt battery cannot be used to start a truck because the truck engine is heavier than a motorcycle engine. It requires heavier voltage of electric current. So learn from here that all the pains and difficulties you encounter in life depends on the level of your soul personality to which you have been awakened. No human being is exempted from this fact of life, but the level of awareness depends on each person's capacity to understand it. The divine world knows you more than you know yourself. Now again, listening further to the dream, I personally call an exception. And before I proceed, I would like to advise anyone never to treat a mad person with contempt, irrespective of their conditions. They are placed at the highest level of learning, the certificate of which is not visible to human eyes. Some of them are under the process of self-discovery, self-sanctification, and others are under the process of self-purification that will help them to climb back the ladder of life, going back to God. Everyone in this world is fighting a battle that we will understand little about. Our duty is to help one another whensoever and wheresoever possible. Furthermore, I would like to discourage everyone from any temptation of committing suicide at whatever pain or difficulty, because it will set your evolution backward. You will die and come back to continue the same difficulty where you left off. So better take life as it presents itself to you. Everything happens for a reason. In this regard, I again quote from the works of Manly P. Hall in The Secret Teachings of All Ages, where he said that the ancients were more moralistic rather than religionistic. They were philosophic rather than theologic. They taught man to use his faculties more intelligently, to be patient in the face of adversity, to be courageous when confronted by danger, to be true in midst of temptation, and most of all, to view a worldly life as the most acceptable sacrifice to God, and his body as an altar sacred to the deity. Therefore, know from this that it will be in your best interest to take life as it comes your way. If you endeavor to know this, you will soon realize that your material worries does not matter a lot. You will begin to be wise and you will begin to get rich when you realize that the greatest riches given to man to acquire is the blossoming of his soul, and that the material things of this world are only tools for human evolution and not for human possession. This indeed will liberate you and increase your happiness because it will give you self-control. You will then begin to understand the biggest secret behind the creation of the material world, namely, that the world is an examination hall, where man must learn to work diligently in order to acquire a greater pass mark that will determine his position in the spiritual world. You will then begin to understand that no prophet or philosopher or any religious organization is responsible for taking you to paradise. That your position in the spiritual world is completely determined by the amount of good work you put in the service of humanity and as a sacrifice to God. Over the years, I was not allowed to speak or act on the symbolisms of my dreams and visions until this time, because the time is right and ripe. But before I proceed, let me once again remind you that this message I'm giving you is not accessible by curiosity or through human education. You can hire hundreds of the most knowledgeable philosophers to come and teach you how to access this message at any time. They will teach you, get tired, get old, and die one by one. Yet, you will never come close to it. You can only come across such knowledge if those men in the spiritual world calls you into among themselves to say, come and see where we are and what we do. And you can only get the limit of what they want you to know because there is a tight security safeguarding their knowledge. Even the process of preparing you through series of trials and difficulties in order to make you ready to receive such message is so painful and difficult to bear that you will regret the day you step into this world as a human being. You will cry and bleed internally and nobody will ever understand what is going on within you. The worst part of it is that you will never be allowed to speak it out to anyone. I'm telling you out of experience. Furthermore, no one plans the affairs of man more than God. He plans it ways in advance and will always execute his plans perfectly. What will soon happen in the world was well planned in place since many years ago. There are very few people in the world who are capable of understanding what I'm about to say now. This message will awaken many people to a reality of life that they never know was existing, and thus serve as a new beginning for the awakening of divine consciousness in many people. Now listen to my last dream as of now, the dream that seems to cap all others, the dream with the real substance, the most powerful of all. But before I proceed, let me once again reaffirm that no human being existing in flesh shall again be allowed access to the source of this message I'm about to relate now. The place is made only for those in transition. I was called into there because this time in human history is different and will never be repeated again. I was allowed to get there and come back into the world, I consider myself a dead person, waiting only for the final whistle. Now listen to it. On the night of 26th, going to the 27th March 2017, while I was at my room at around 10 p.m. in the night, I lay on my bed and fell asleep. In that night, I had a very amazing dream, during which I was taken spiritually into a very strange but beautiful place, the appearance of which was so different to anything I have ever seen on earth. I found myself in a big hall of about 20 square meters, that is 20 square meters in the east, at the west, south, and north. The height of the hall was about 6 meters. In that hall were men and few women clothed in golden orange color. The walls of the hall was covered with golden curtain from the roof down to the floor. The ceiling was of beautiful design and also of plated gold. The floor was of golden brown that looked like tile, but there was no crevices or joints of one tile to the other. In that hall, I did not see any electricity bulb, yet the room was bright and well lighted in cool white. And there were people seated in chairs that formed a circle shape within the squared hall. This I shall describe at a later stage. The weather condition of the hall was mild and normal. I did not see doors or windows. How I got into the hall, I did not know, but I found myself at the middle of two men standing in the western side of the hall. One black man of average height and stature was at the front, clothed in golden orange robe, and on his waist was tied a rope or cordelier of the same color type, plus another rope on his shoulder, which I shall describe at a later stage. He was having a golden sword with a golden sheath, and was commanding the position of the high priest. He was revered on the day, and everyone was calm at that moment when I entered. He held the sword with his two hands. The appearance of the sword was different from all swords I have ever seen on earth, because towards the edge of the sheath it was curved. And the one on my back was a tall black man, clothed in similar fashion, like the one in the front bearing the sword, but without a second robe on his shoulder. He had a golden staff of authority in his right hand. He seemed to be the one acting like a guardian and maintaining order in that hall, where there was a meeting of many men and few women. On the floor of the hall was designed a big cross, golden cross at the center of the hall. At the intersection of the cross was designed a big circle in bluish color. On top of the big circle was placed another circle, also in bluish color, the symbol of which I shall explain later in this message. Whilst I was standing in between the two men and not yet make any move, my attention was drawn towards my left side, at the northwestern side of the hall, near the foot of the cross, where I saw Nelson Mandela, the late President of South Africa, seated down and his right hand on the right cheek, and I immediately recognized him. He looked very sad. Seated next to Mandela at his left side was Martin Luther King, the late American human rights activist. Next to Martin Luther King was seated Bob Marley, the late Jamaican reggae man, and I immediately recognized them all. Mandela looked at me and returned his face, same as Martin Luther King and Bob Marley. They all showed me their faces and returned gently and kept quiet. But as soon as I entered that hall and saw Mandela and those seated next to him, my memory in regard to many political figures I knew when studying politics and history began to be activated. My attention was drawn towards my right hand in the southwestern part of the hall, where I saw many people seated there. Some of them were faces I knew through my brief study of history and international relations, and some I recognized later through internet search. Among those seated in southwestern side, I recognized these few men. There was Fidel Castro, the late leader of Cuba, seated next to Hugo Chavez, the recent last president of the Republic of Venezuela. And I immediately recognized them. Chavez was at the left side of Castro. I saw François Mitterrand, the former president of France, seated next to Joseph Stalin, the former leader of Russia, whom I recognized immediately. But Mitterrand I later recognized through internet, although his face looked familiar to me due to many of my friends in Burkina Faso coming with books of history when visiting my salon. I saw also Winston Churchill, the former leader of Great Britain, and I immediately recognized him. Seated next to Winston Churchill was Mahatma Gandhi, the former leader of the Republic of India, whom I recognized his face across South Africa and in history books. I saw Benjamin Franklin, whose face looks familiar, but whom I later recognized from the internet as the former president of the United States of America, because his face is on the US dollar note. I also saw John F. Kennedy, the former president of the United States of America, assassinated, whom I later recognized through internet when I searched about American states presidents. He is a smiling person. I also saw Mao Zedong, the former leader of the Republic of China, whom I know better as Chairman Mao, and I recognized him immediately. I saw a fat black man, whom I later recognized through internet to be Joshua Nkomo of Zimbabwe. Whilst we were standing on the western side, I recognized the above mentioned persons, but when we began to walk towards the east, I began to see and to recognize more persons whose faces were familiar to me. At the other side, towards southeast, I saw Mobutu Sese Seko, the former president of Zaire, and I recognized him instantly. I saw Gnassingbé Eyadema of Togo, seated next to Humphrey Bouini of the Republic of Ivory Coast, and I recognized both of them instantly. Furthermore, I saw Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, and I recognized him immediately. Here also I saw Patrice Lumumba of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I recognized him immediately. Seated next to Patrice Lumumba was Thomas Sankara, the former president of the Republic of Burkina Faso, and I immediately recognized them. In the eastern side, I saw Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, the former president of Nigeria, and I recognized him immediately. Among those I saw seated in the southeast was Chief Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, the former Biafran warlord who wanted to divide Nigeria and have the state of Biafra. The reason I shall explain later in this message. Seated next to Ojukwu was General Sani Abacha, the former military president of the Republic of Nigeria. Ojukwu smiled at me briefly, while Sani Abacha was simply looking at me. At the northeastern side were seated few women and some men at their back. Behind the women at the northeast, I saw two men with similar hairstyle. One of them I recognized immediately to be Milton Obote of Uganda, whom I knew his face during my African studies. The other one was a familiar face, but I did not remember him until I began to search in the internet, where I remembered him as Frederick Douglass, whom I knew through African American studies. Here also at the northeast, I saw someone whom I later recognized through internet when I searched for American president, and he was Abraham Lincoln. At the back seat of the northeast, I saw Samora Machel, the late president of the Republic of Mozambique, and I recognized him immediately. Seated next to Samora Machel was Marcus Garvey of Jamaica, whom I know from the study of African diaspora, and I recognized him immediately. I also saw Emperor Haile Selassie, the former president of Ethiopia, seated next to Omar Bongo of Gabon, and I recognized them immediately. I saw Laurent Kabila, the former leader of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I immediately recognized him. But there was a white man seated distantly on a golden throne, closer to the woman, but nearer to the intersection of the cross on the floor to the northeast. He was having a staff of authority in his right hand, and at the top of this staff of authority was the round globe that represents the shape of the world, also in gold. He was clothed in the same manner as the one bearing the sword. This I shall explain later in this message. The simple design of the staff I shall describe at a later stage. The design of the staff was the same as the design of the staff of the guardian, but that of the guardian did not have the globe on it. Everyone I saw there was all seated calm and happy, except Nelson Mandela. But there were two men who seemed to be very happy in their facial expressions, seated next to each other, in the southeast back seats. Those men, I knew them well, and they are Oliver Tambo, seated next to Walter Sisulu. Both of them are from South Africa. Walter Sisulu smiled to Oliver Tambo, and Tambo responded briefly, and both kept quiet. And they both seemed to be mocking at Nelson Mandela as if they were saying, "I told you." They also seemed to be happy that I was brought into that place, as Oliver Tambo was nodding his head, while Walter Sisulu was simply staring and smiling at me. Walter Sisulu is a man capable of bringing down a mountain with the power of smile. He doesn't allow his anger to show on his face, but Oliver Tambo is a man whose face shows his mind. The way I see them in that place. In the hall were seated people from different races of mankind all around. All men were clothed in similar fashion, in golden orange robe, and on their waist was tied a rope or a cordelier of golden color as well. The women were dressed in golden orange color materials, but on different designs. Some wore robes and tied wrapper like African women fashion, and some others wore ladies fashion like that of Nigerian women, with hair tie called ichafu in Igbo language. All the women I saw there were black women. There are also few women who are fair in complexion. Whether they are whites, I'm not sure, because all women there were dressed in African style. As I kept on looking around the hall, being curious to know the people I saw seated in the hall, the one at my back with golden staff of authority said to me, "You are brought here to receive messages and not to recognize all the faces, and that I should therefore pay attention to the one in the front." Then my attention turned that I had to concentrate. There were many more people from all across racial backgrounds whom I did not know their faces, as the hall was filled that no chair was vacant. The man at my back, who was having a golden staff of authority, seemed to be playing the role of a guardian or an instructor, and he told me to follow the one at the front bearing the golden sword. He instructed me to move with my left foot, which I obeyed. As the one with the sword moved with his left foot, I followed him according to the instruction given by the one at my back, and the one at my back followed as well. No words were spoken there. All communications was done through telepathy and science. Telepathy is a term I'm familiar with through the study of esoteric works. As we kept on walking on the big cross that was designed on the floor going to the eastern side, my shoe was the only one making noise. I don't know the type of shoe they wore that doesn't make noise. As we arrived at the heart or center of the cross, there was a big circle, and in the big circle was a smaller circle, as I already mentioned above. The one bearing this golden sword stopped with his 2 feet for a moment at the edge of the big circle. He then stepped with his left foot into the first big circle and bring the right leg to be together while I was instructed to stop. He then again stepped with his left foot into the small circle and bring the right leg to be together and stop for a while he still held the sword with his two hands at the height of the chest. Then he proceeded walking to the east, where there was an altar made of golden material, shaped like a table, and a throne also made of gold for sitting down. On the golden altar was a golden cross, similar to the one on the floor. The features of the cross on the altar I shall describe to those who can understand it. The one with the golden sword, while facing the altar, took one step to the left to avoid colliding with the altar. He then went to the right side of the altar and took one step with his right foot to balance himself between the altar and the golden throne. And while standing there, he continued looking towards the east for a while before turning to sit on a golden throne facing the west. When he turned, I saw his face. It was Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the former president of the Republic of Ghana. When he sat down on the throne, he kept the sword on the altar. Then the one at my back instructed me to approach the big circle and take a similar step as did by the one bearing the golden sword, but not to proceed to the altar at the east. I then stepped into the big circle with my left foot and bring the right foot to be together. And I stopped for a moment and took a similar step with my left foot again into the smaller circle and bring the right foot into it where I was instructed to stop and salute the one on the throne with an inclination of head, which I did and stood there. But Nkrumah did not return the salutation. He simply was staring at me eyeball to eyeball. He stared at me intensely until I began to feel inferior, but at the same time growing with confidence. As I stood there like a stranger, the ceremony and the purpose of the meeting began. Kwame Nkrumah stood up, and all the people in that hall stood up with him in unison. And the Nkrumah took the sword from the altar and drew the sword from its seat with his right hand, and it was a straight golden glittering sword. As soon as he drew out the sword, all people in that meeting, while standing, breathed in unison and held their breath. And he pointed the sword towards my feet as I was standing in the smaller circle, and a light similar to a laser touch light was protruding from the end point of the sword. And he moved his hand bearing the sword slowly from my feet to my forehead, and continued pointing it for a while. The lightning was mild to my eyes, but I was still looking at it. When he withdrew the sword, the light went off, and all the people in the hall released their breath in unison, and in a relaxed mood. He put the sword back into its seat, and placed it back on the altar at the back of the cross towards himself. Kwame Nkrumah sat down first, and all the people sat down in unison after him. But I continued to stand in that smaller circle as I was instructed by the guardian. There was one great exception in the northeast which I did not understand. It was a white man seated near the intersection of the cross and near to the women. He was seated on a throne like that of Kwame Nkrumah, and he held a golden staff at his right hand. While everyone stood there, the man also was upstanding, and he was winking his left eyes and making signs with his left hand, apparently calling my attention to recognize his face, because I don't know that face, but I managed to memorize his face at that moment. He resembled a Greek man I know in Johannesburg. I did not know him at that moment till a few months later. I will explain later in this message. After Kwame Nkrumah sat down and all the people in unison sat with him, while I was still standing in the small circle, my attention was drawn to look up towards the northeast column, where women were seated, at about 4 meters high. There I saw the face of Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, the former chairperson of African Union. Her face was like the work of an artist drawn on the air. I saw only from her neck to her hair tie. The picture was not drawn on a paper, and it had no photo frames, nor was it hanged with a rope or nail, as it was not near the wall. It was simply suspended on the air. The reason of her appearance in that meeting as explained later in this message. After that of Dr. Dlamini Zuma, my attention was immediately also drawn towards the southeastern direction of the hall, where I saw Adolf Hitler, the former leader of Germany during the Second World War, also suspended in the air. He was slightly facing northeast. He was the only person clothed in black robe, with white strip on the neck of the robe. He was placed in a wooden dock like someone placed for judgment. The appearance of the wooden dock and the meaning of his appearance I shall explain later in this message. This concludes the account of that simple but most powerful ceremony. After the ceremony, I was instructed by the guardian to turn back and follow him towards exit with similar steps like the one I took on stepping into the circles, which I obeyed. I was instructed to turn towards west, while still having my 2 feet in the small circle, which I did. I was then instructed to step into the bigger circle and stood there for a while, facing west, which I did. I was again instructed to step out of the big circle with my left foot, which I obeyed, and followed the guardian. As we were walking towards the east, he was at the front while I followed him at back. As I approached the western column near the foot of the cross on the floor, I had a direct eye contact with Nelson Mandela, whose case and situation is totally different to others in that hall, and which I shall explain later in this message. It was only on this moment of exit that I smiled at Nelson Mandela, but he was too serious to respond the smile. He instead was winking his right eyes towards me, like someone instigating someone to stay courageous and take action, and I showed him a thumbs-up sign of willingness to serve. I made him a promise that I would do everything in my power to help the problems of South Africa. He was agitating with his usual clenched fist raised up. As I approached him, he stood up from his seat and extending his hands in an attempt to touch me, but he did not touch me. I continued to the west and was instructed by the guardian to turn and face the east again. The guardian instructed me to salute Kwame Nkrumah with an inclination of head, which I did, and Nkrumah on his part returned the greeting to me with an inclination of head as well, apparently bidding me farewell. No words were spoken, only telepathy and signs. And then I turned towards exit according to the instruction of the guardian and took my first step, also with left foot, and the door was closed. It wasn't a physical door like we have on earth. It was a blackout, and I was sent back to earth, where I woke up in my worldly senses. And I was so tired for that exhausting journey, but the place was so beautiful and interesting that I fell asleep again, wanted to go back there, but no ways. It was closed. This concludes the account of that dream. Please pay attention to the explanations further. The place I went to is an organization which I don't know the name I will give to it, but I will simply call it an assembly of late world leaders of recent memory. This was not like other dreams and visions that troubled me. Totally beautiful place to be. As days go by, the meaning of the things I saw in that journey and the purpose of bringing me there into the superior world was constantly conveyed to be, which I shall relate here and which forms the core of this message. What I saw there made me to understand that in the spiritual world there are levels of existence called planes. The levels were distinct from one another, and all the souls in all levels still acknowledge a supreme being to whom they worship and from whom they derive powers and authority. There were no men or women as we have on earth, or different races. There are only souls who appear to us in a manner we can recognize them whenever they want us to see them. A soul can be at a lower level, happy if it accomplishes well its assigned duty on earth. And the soul can be at a higher level and unhappy if it did not accomplish its assigned duty on earth. And because there are different planes of existence, and all souls are not on the same level, Some dwell at lower level and some at higher level. The meeting was brought to the lowest level possible to accommodate all those who are qualified to be there, because the spiritual world is like an upstairs, which every man shall climb, seeking to go back to the top. Those who, for example, are dwelling on the second level are not allowed to go to the third level or more. But those who dwell at the 10th level are allowed to come to lower level because they already passed that level before going to the upper side. So on that day, the meeting was brought to the lowest level possible to accommodate those who are qualified to be in the meeting but are not qualified to be at the upper level. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was the high priest of the day. That was why he had the golden sword and was seated on the golden throne in the east. According to the information I'm giving afterwards regarding what I saw there, please listen further. Now, regarding the symbolisms of the circles on the heart of the cross on the floor, the first big circle on the cross represents the natural world, and the smaller circle imposed on the big circle represents the political world. I am not informed about the golden cross itself, and the golden cross which was placed on the altar according to the designs will be used on the house of God to be built in Jerusalem, which I shall explain later in this message. Now, regarding the women I saw seated there, among them I managed to recognize one old woman after I was made to understand that they are those women who fought for liberation in the Western world. The face looked familiar due to my study of African American slave history. I later recalled her very well through internet search to be Harriet Tubman, due to her involvement in what was then called Underground Railroad, that helped many slaves to escape into a free land in North America and Canada. Now, listen to this powerful and mind-boggling information. Listen properly. There are a few African leaders who are well recognized for their accomplishments, and others are not yet accomplished and are on the spotlight over there. And among them is one president from outside Africa. The most respected and highly accomplished leader in Africa today is Robert Mugabe, the president of the Republic of Zimbabwe. He is recognized to be powerful, and whatever he continues to do today on earth is an added bonus to his great accomplishments. Robert Mugabe shall after death join them above, and he will be received with great honor and with great respect. Next is Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, the former president of the Republic of Zambia. He shall after death join them above, and he will be received with great respect. Next is John J. Rawlings, the former president of the Republic of Ghana. He was called a loyal servant. This I shall explain later in this message. Rawlings will die and join them above and will be received well. Next is Sam Nujoma, the former president of the Republic of Namibia. Although he will have few questions to answer there, he is highly respected among those I'm informed. Sam Nujoma shall die and will be received well on arrival. Now, these are the presidents who have not yet accomplished their mission and upon whom special attention are placed. The president on the spotlight are Jacob Zuma, the president of the Republic of South Africa. They are paying him serious attention from above. Next is Joseph Kabila, the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. He also is on the spotlight. Next is Alassane Ouattara, the president of the Republic of Ivory Coast. Serious attention is paid on him from above. Next outside of Africa is President Nicolas Maduro, the president of the Republic of Venezuela. Attention is placed on him significantly. Now, the death of Muammar Gaddafi of Libya was planned from above, and it was signed and sanctioned by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. This I shall explain later in this message. Going further, the decision to remove Thabo Mbeki from power was from above. This I shall explain to the people of South Africa when I meet them, and if it is necessary. The current leaders of the African National Congress Party of South Africa, although still gripped with timidity, are well on track regarding Nelson Mandela's activities from above. This I shall explain later in this message. The advice I will give to the African National Congress is that any of their members who wishes to quit the party in this troubled time should be allowed to go peacefully. The loyal members should stay true to the obligation they owe to the people of South Africa and the African continent at large. There are 3 important men in the world who shall receive those messages not made for public ears, whom I will not see or have any eye contact with any of them until the day when their continental and worldly responsibilities shall be unveiled to them. These men are Thabo Mbeki, the former president of the Republic of South Africa, who shall play important role in shaping the new Africa, followed by Olusegun Obasanjo, the former president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as his deputy. And finally, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Israel, as I see them on the day when their responsibilities shall be unveiled to them. On that day, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria must be there on the day to receive his visitors. These shall include the traditional leaders of the Igbo tribe of southeastern Nigeria. Benjamin Netanyahu shall play a big role in the relationship between Africa and Israel. On that day when it will be unveiled, Netanyahu must be there even if he is out of office. He must be accompanied by the sitting Prime Minister of Israel and few wise men from the people of Israel. The venue is already decided. The date will be announced later, and that will be a special day in the history of the world. Those 3 men and the few personalities from Israel shall organize themselves in a manner that after that day, they shall immediately take off from the venue to Johannesburg without going back to Israel, although this will depend on the outcome of events. Others shall be the former African leaders and current leaders of Africa who may wish to attend, with the exception of Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, and Western Sahara. These men, I shall meet them at a later stage. While the 3 above-mentioned men with the wise men among Israel goes to Johannesburg, other attendants must return home except Robert Mugabe if he is healthy enough to accompany them. Actually, Robert Mugabe was supposed to be the head of New Africa, to be followed by Thabo Mbeki, then Olusegun Obasanjo. But age is no longer on his side for the long task that lies ahead. But he will always be there until he is no longer able to continue. Now, regarding the reason why the above-mentioned 3 men must avoid eye contact with me, and they must avoid communication of any type, whether emails, phone calls, or through social media with me, until the day when their duties shall be unveiled to them. There is nothing well about it. The reason, as I know from above, is that there is a spiritual power that accompanies first eye contact, especially on a big occasion, when the expectation of the people is coming to accomplishment. And that having eyesight before the day will weaken the whole power and will require huge labor to replace it. That also was why Dr. Kwame Nkrumah placed himself in a position that I may not see him before the ceremony began. And that was the reason why the ceremony started by fixing eyesight to mine for a moment to be able to infuse some energy that will be brought into the world. I was asked to tell the above-mentioned 3 men that whoever among them that disregards this order will pay with huge energy deduction from their lives, and they will not know it until after their death. For these 3 men, after their duty on earth, shall die and join them in the golden house above. I should have delayed releasing this message till 2018, but I have to release it now to help such nations as Venezuela, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and more particularly South Africa, to understand their political situations better and handle it accordingly. Once again, it is surprising to realize that the living is ruled by the dead. And while man has his freedom to carry his aspirations, the greater powers act from above. Now, regarding the meaning of what I saw there, the personalities thereby shown to me, and the activities that had, is, and will be taking a place. Please listen to it carefully. The political killings that were taking place in Ghana during the days of J.J. Rawlings were all the works of Kwame Nkrumah from above. That was done in order to clear some fields and make Ghana governable. It is based on this that J.J. Rawlings was called a good servant, and similar situation might be carried out in South Africa. This I will explain later in this message. Going further, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma has been nominated as the next president of the Republic of South Africa. I hear people saying that Jacob Zuma was grooming her to become president in order to shield him from his corruption cases. That is not true, although men can do some things for their own reasons. Even the tradition of sourcing African Union chairpersons from smaller African countries was broken in order to put her there, that she may familiarize herself with continental affairs in preparation for her presidency. And people are saying that Zuma must step down. Zuma won't step down. He will definitely finish his presidency, and he will continue to be involved in the affairs of the African National Congress and those of South Africa whenever duty calls on him. People are also saying that he is using the land and economic issues of South Africa to remain in power towards the end of his presidency. That also is a false accusation. Jacob Zuma had these issues at heart even before becoming the president of South Africa, but it was not allowed to happen earlier because Zimbabwe issue was hot on heels, and many Zimbabweans are seeking refuge in South Africa. It will be too bad if the two neighboring countries are burning at the same time. All what we see happening in South Africa right now is from Nelson Mandela working from above, as I will explain later in this message. And people may think that Nelson Mandela has influenced from the upper world the decision to make Dlamini Zuma the next president of South Africa. But no. The decision has been taken even before the death of Mandela. Even Mandela himself is not allowed to speak loud and make contributions because he has a poor record for not advancing well his mission on earth. This I shall explain later in this message. My advice to South African political aspirants is to simply stay clear of trying to avoid Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma from becoming the next president of South Africa, because such moves will be crushed from above. And I have a special advice for Cyril Ramaphosa, the Deputy President of South Africa, which I would like to whisper into his ears in his privacy than making it public. My advice to Jacob Zuma is to remain calm, strong and focused in regard to what he has in mind regarding the problems of South Africa. And I say to Mr. Zuma, enemies shall pursue you from the beginning to the end, and they shall fall by the wayside from beginning to the end. For the God who created the bull without a long tail shall always provide it with the means to shake off the flies that comes to bite its wounds. Hold no grudge against any man, but acquire the watchful eyes of an owl. For through you shall the energies of freedom saturate all over South Africa once more. Do not be intimidated by the so-called economic meltdown, for man exists on earth not because of economic power, but because God has created them to live. For even under the highest economic attainment, people still suffer and die. Freedom, our freedom, first before all. Afterwards, you, Mr. Zuma, shall die and join them above. Furthermore, let the African National Congress be open-minded. For some members will return because they will now realize that they acted out of ignorance. Some members will be forced out, and some will work with the ANC, even when they do not make official return. For nobody will bring the ANC down from power as of now, until its role is advanced in the continent. The African National Congress, like all other political parties in Africa, will go down with the emergence of the new Africa, and it shall happen in a manner that everyone will be happy. My advice to the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo is to allow President Joseph Kabila more years in power, because there is a change in mind. Attempting to force him out of power will create more problems in that country, and you may not succeed. And there is a message to be delivered to the political leaders of the Democratic Republic of Congo in their privacy. Furthermore, my advice to Alassane Ouattara is to ensure that Ivory Coast does not go back to civil war, given the disputable circumstances that brought him to power, because such occurrences will cost him badly. And there is a message to be delivered to Mr. Alassane Ouattara, the President of the Republic of Ivory Coast, in his privacy. My advice to the people of Venezuela is to rally behind their president and pay attention to their political and economic situation, because Hugo Chavez is working from above and will continue working until the ideas of political and economic reform of Venezuela is brought to significance. To the president himself, President Nicolas Maduro, I advise you to remain strong and courageous to eliminate all political and administrative obstacles that may hinder you from emancipating the oppressed people of Venezuela. But you must remain truthful to yourself and to the people of Venezuela in these trying times, because victory of good over evil is sure. Now, concerning Adolf Hitler, who was standing judgment over there, the judgment has been completed and the decision has been taken that Adolf Hitler will return to Earth. Surprisingly, and I say surprisingly, as a citizen of Israel, born by both Jewish father and mother, and he shall rule that nation for many years, but as a madman from the street. And Hitler have accepted that responsibility. Any moment from now, Adolf Hitler shall return back to the earth, the manifestation of which I shall explain to the people of Israel when I meet them. On that day, any politician who wants to learn must pay attention. At some point in the evolution of humanity, man is no longer allowed the total freedom to make his choices, for he is confused, and whatever choices he makes is wrong. It is during this type of period that the divine providence intervenes in the affairs of man to guide him towards the next level that he requires. However, on this great wisdom, let me keep quiet. For just as a strong food is made for strong mouth, big words are made for circumcised minds. Furthermore, on the decision that was taken above, please pay attention here. A decision has been taken that the United Nations Organization and all its affiliated bodies shall be destroyed. A decision has been taken that the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and all their affiliated bodies shall come to an end. The International Criminal Court shall be brought to an end. The Commonwealth Organization will come to its perpetual end. The Francophone Organization shall come to its end. All organizations bonded together by the legacies of colonialism shall be brought to their perpetual end. A decision has been taken on the African Union. Therefore, the African Union shall go down the drain. A decision has been taken that the Organization of American States shall be brought to a perpetual end. A decision has been taken that the United States of America shall be shattered. This includes Canada. For there shall come up a tiny voice from the Native Americans, and to it must everybody pay attention. A decision has been taken regarding the European Union. The European Union has been judged as a union of materialism with heavy hypocrisy, great handshake and good laughter, but with rotten blood among its members. Therefore, the European Union shall come to an end. Furthermore, major European nations like Great Britain, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, Spain, and more significantly France, shall see a change difficult to understand within them and in their relationship with the rest of the world. Italy also will be affected because Rome shall face a different direction. Australia shall be shattered, including New Zealand, and the aborigines of Australia shall return to take control. Russia shall remain as it is for now, but will also face its reality at a later period. China shall be divided because Tibet will go, and other smaller components of China will go as well. North and South Korea shall come back as one nation, with the South Koreans making a serious apology to the North. Brazil shall be divided, and India won't be spared. There is a message to be delivered to the United Nations General Assembly when the opportunity arises. Now, the United Nations organization shall be replaced by what will be called the House of God, which must be built in Jerusalem. But many strong decisions shall be coming from Africa. The House of God shall serve as the political and the administrative headquarters of the New World. At the entrance of the House of God shall be written the admonition, as above, so below. On top of the House of God shall be placed the cross, which I saw in that dream placed on the altar. The beauty and power of that house shall vibrate all across the world. It will bring peace for mankind. The fishes of the sea, the winged creatures of the heavens, the inanimate kingdoms, the vegetable kingdoms, and all kingdoms of mankind shall see and enjoy the power of that house. All eyes shall see it, all nose shall smell its aroma, and all hands shall touch it without the need to travel to Jerusalem. For all shall know God from there, and all those in that house shall be called the allies of God. Its power shall remove the excrements of evils all across the world. Going further, the African Union shall be replaced by a house to be designed like a dome, and will be called the House of Africa. At the entrance of the House of Africa shall be written the injunction, live and let live. It will be the political house of African nations, and which shall be extremely powerful in the world. The venue of that house was already decided, and at the center of the House of Africa must I be buried when I die. This I shall make known later. Further on Africa is the political reform and economic new beginning of the continent, which shall be carried out. The idea in this regard is with me. And there shall be established the World Financial and Economic Cooperation, which shall be in Africa. It shall alleviate the financial and economic problems of many nations of the world and liberate mankind from bondship. The whole world is not happy with the economic system of the world and the impact it has on many people across the world. But let me keep quiet on this issue for now. The role of the World Financial and Economic Cooperation and how it will start, I shall explain when the time is due. Although it is made to help mankind in balancing their material and spiritual needs, it has some controversies. There shall be established a World Institute for Interplanetary Advancement, which shall be responsible for, among other things, the discovery of other planets, interplanetary diplomacy and cooperation, and the Earth's defense systems. Many other world and continental bodies shall be established following these. Now, there is a principle which people say is Jewish, that which had existed even before we know Abraham. And yes, it is Jewish, and will continue to be Jewish until mankind learn to see themselves as originating from one source of creation. This I shall explain to the people of Arabs when I meet them in Saudi Arabia. Many, many years after our time, a voice shall be issued from Sweden, the voice of which will look like the face of Luis Figo, the former Portugal football captain. The voice shall be eloquent and shall plead on behalf of the people of Europe. This I shall explain to the Europeans when I meet them. And time is coming soon when the black people spread all across the West, with the lead of black Americans, shall enter Egypt and Libya and spread themselves all across the North Africa. Now, concerning Chief Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, who led the War of Secession in Nigeria. He was having Africa very well in mind, but his attempt of realizing Biafra was stopped because the breakup of Nigeria as at that time would not be good for Africa. For none of the breakaway countries then would be strong enough to carry the political responsibilities a united Nigeria was carrying in the continent. But now that the issue of Biafra has risen again as endorsed from above, Nigeria will meet its end, just like many other nations of Africa and the rest of the world. Now on the 3rd of July, around 11:30 to 12 a.m., I was worried about the man I saw seated near the women in the meeting, whose position was distinct from others and who was holding a golden staff of authority. And the spirit told me that he was a former Israeli leader. And I immediately asked my workers to buy me internet data on my cell phone. And I googled former Israeli leaders, and alas, it came out with the face of this man. It was David Ben-Gurion. I read and found out that he was the founding father of the modern Israeli state. The reason of his appearance and the position he occupied in that meeting, I believe by now should be known by any reasonable listener. Now, regarding the spot on which the house of God shall be built in Jerusalem, on the 17th of July at around 7:30 p.m., while I was standing in my bar and at the same time thinking about this message, a message immediately came to me that the house of God must be built on the particular part of Jerusalem that is constantly in dispute with the Arabs. The message said that Jerusalem will remain an undisputable part of Israel, and that anyone going into the spot to be occupied by the house of God must obtain the permission of the world community. That Jerusalem in its entirety shall be part of Israel. This is non-conditional and non-negotiable. I did not have the courage to include this message of Jerusalem in this message, for fear of the uprising it may cause. But on the early morning of 28 July, in a dream, I was asked to include it, and I woke up and do so. Now, concerning the death of Muammar Gaddafi, on the 31st of July, I woke up in the morning in an unbalanced mood. I couldn't understand why I was not happy, because there was no reason to be sad. Yet I was not happy. I began to think maybe something wrong would happen to me during the day. I had to check my car if anything is wrong that can cause damage. I checked water, oil, tire pressure, and all is well. I checked all things to which my daily life was connected, including my businesses, and all is well. Yet I wasn't happy, but cannot say why. That bad mood continued until around 6 p.m. when I sat down in my bar to have a glass of beer. And suddenly an information reached to me about the death of Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi was a victim of his terrible ideas. He was not planning to unite Africa for the good of the people of Africa. He was planning to unite Africa and join them with the Middle East Arabs and Asia to fight and to eliminate the people of Israel. That was why the Supreme Masters above had to rally world forces and kill him. There is no need to warn Africa about the dangers of such thing in the future, because the right thing has come to stay, and that is African unity, as a glory from God. I myself would have met with Gaddafi before that time should I have succeeded meeting with the ambassador of Libya in South Africa in 2011. This was before the war in Libya started, but this is not necessary to explain here. What I will say to the people of Israel at this point in time is that they should have no fear anymore. The security and peace of Israel is here to stay. I therefore encourage the people of Israel to look towards developing their land with confidence and ease. Now, regarding the 10 moral obligations for Africa, which I received in Dakar, and which I said earlier that I will explain afterwards, and which shall lie forever at the root of Afro-Israeli relationship. I shall explain only 8 of them here, because the other 2 are controversial and too heavy for ordinary minds to hear, until I get those who are capable of comprehending them. Those moral obligations are as follows. 1. You must not go for selfish justice. 2. You must defend the truth all your lifetime. 3. You must not abuse a leader, for he is representing God. 4. You must not cause troubles in another man's land so as to obtain your economic interest. 5. You must not kill one another again in war. 6. You must not greedily exploit the gift of nature, nor must you rush to gain nature before its appointed time. You must not make mockery of God. And finally, you must not arrogantly exalt yourself above any man when the power of nature has reduced him. You should maintain your position, and you should always help with as much as you can to anyone calling for your help. This concludes the 8th of the 10 moral obligations I wish the public to hear.